So we're continuing Tanya, chapter 10. We're up to part 3 of this chapter. Today we're explaining the tzaddik she'enoi gamur, the tzaddik who is not complete, or as it's otherwise referred to as tzaddik veraloi, tzaddik that evil is to him, and we're going to explain what those words mean. So we explained last week that a tzaddik gamur, a complete tzaddik, is one that every bit of evil was transformed to good. And that's because he is absolutely repulsed by anything against purity, against Kedusha, against God. And therefore, even the thought of anything worldly or anything not overtly godly is it's like soiled garments, or as we actually said last week, quite literally, it means garments that have been defecated upon, which anybody would be completely repulsed from that, and that's the degree to which the tzaddik gomor, the complete tzaddik, is repulsed by any worldly things, and that enables him, or I should say, that is fueled by his love for God, which is such an intense love, and it's almost automatic that his feelings towards worldly things are completely repulsed. And therefore, any feelings of passion and excitement may exist in concept, but they're used only to be passionate and excited about godly things. So his animal soul might still be animalistic in its style, but the nature of what it's desiring is now only holy things. So now the Alter Rebbe continues with the words "V'tzadik she'enoi gamor hu." A tzaddik she'enoi gamor, the incomplete tzaddik, is as follows: She'enoi soinei hasitra achro betachlis asina. He does not hate the other side, the non-holy side, with utter hatred. And therefore he doesn't absolutely hate anything that's evil. So of course, even the quote-unquote incomplete tzaddik still has a great deal of love for Hashem. And because he loves Hashem, naturally, he's going to hate anything that's against Hashem and even be disgusted by it. However, it's not absolute hatred. That's the key difference here. Is it, relative hatred, or is it absolute hatred? And because it's not absolute hatred by the incomplete tzaddik, therefore, he's not absolutely disgusted by anything that is ungodly. Because feeling disgusted by worldly pleasures is only possible when you're disgusted by anything from Sitra Achra. Because all worldly pleasures come and receive their vitality from the Sitra Achra. So v'chol she'ein hasina v'hamius betachlis, and in any case where the hatred and disgust is not absolute, al karchach nishar eza shemetz ava v'tainug l'sham. That means that there must be some remnants of love and delight to that thing, to worldly pleasures. And the soiled garments, so to speak, have not been removed from there. So, since the incomplete tzaddik is not disgusted with worldly pleasures in an absolute way, that means that his nefesh habahamis, his animal soul, still has a taiva, still has a desire to one degree or another to those things. So that means that the power of taiva, the power of delight, which is animalistic in style, still has soiled, defecated garments attached to it. As much as he doesn't want it, but it's still there. And you can't put on new garments till you take off your old soiled garments. Because you know what happens when you put on new garments onto soiled garments? The new garments get soiled. Pretty simple. So the incomplete tzaddik still has, to use the metaphor, some bit of soil left on the garments, some bit of delight, that means, and pleasure in worldly matters. Now, to be clear, that doesn't play itself out in actually wanting to engage in worldly matters, because a tzaddik, even a tzaddik she'enoi gamor, still is a tzaddik, which means he has no actual practical desire to do anything worldly and ungodly. And that bit of dirt, that bit of soiled garments that's there, it's not noticeable to himself. He doesn't actually feel it. He's not actually drawn towards any worldly things, but it's still hidden there within him. And still, objectively speaking, fundamentally speaking, he hasn't fully gotten rid of every last bit of desire towards worldly things. So practically, subjectively, in his experience, he's not desiring to eat pizza and ice cream. But the concept that pizza and ice cream is desirable still exists within him. So I think a good example of this would be rotten bread, spoiled bread. Usually, people don't want to eat spoiled bread, right? However, if you're alone in the desert and you're starving and you have nothing else to eat and you need to survive, you'll eat the spoiled bread. Even though it'll be disgusting, it won't be enjoyable, but it's not utterly disgusting. It's not like going into a cow's barn and picking up what's over there, right? And eating that's I think most people, even if we're gonna die, the thought of putting that in your mouth is just so unconscionable. But to eat spoiled bread, okay, if times get desperate, I can physically get that food in my mouth. It may be difficult, it may be unenjoyable, but it could be done. It's not absolute disgust. So I guess that's the distinction to be made between the incomplete tzaddik and the complete tzaddik. The incomplete tzaddik is eating spoiled bread. The complete tzaddik, if it were to engage in worldly pleasures, is like literally eating horse dung. So v'lachein lo napach l'tayv mamish. Now, this is why the incomplete tzaddik has not transformed his nefesh habahamis into complete good. Why? Because the power of desire of the animal soul still is somewhat holding on to worldly pleasures. The animal soul still can distinguish between ice cream and horse poop. So that's why the incomplete tzaddik has not transformed his animal soul to want and be passionate and be fully on board with the godly cause. Because the animal soul is still somewhat attached to worldly pleasures. So if it's still somewhat attached to worldly pleasures, it cannot at the same time be attached to and yearning for godly pleasures. Because those are two things that are mutually exclusive and cannot dwell together. So, does that mean that the incomplete tzaddik still might want to do some of these worldly things? Still might want to pursue olam hazeh, as we call it, this world, the pleasures of this world? He says no. If you're a tzaddik, means you're not pursuing any of that. Why? Because even though it might still be conceptually on the garments, whatever, the Alter Rebbe says, Ela shehu batel b'miyutai. But that desire is nullified in its quantity. Ukalach hashiv, it's as if it doesn't exist. V'lachein nikra tzadik v'ra loy. Tzadik v'ra kafufu batel loy. Therefore, he is called a tzaddik, which evil is, and he adds in the words, submitted and nullified to him. So yes, there might be a little remnants of evil. There might be a remnants of desire to things that are not godly, but it's totally subservient and nullified and overpowered by him. So even though the incomplete tzaddik is not absolutely disgusted with worldly pleasures and still has a remnants of a desire to that, he personally doesn't feel that desire. Why? Because it's so overpowered by the godly desires, by the godly interests. And that explains the term um, that we mentioned. I think it was in chapter 1 on the first page. It says, Tzaddik v'toivle, tzaddik v'rale. A tzaddik that good is to him and a tzaddik that evil is to him. So we're now explaining that evil is to him means that the evil is very, very dormant and almost non-existent, and it's completely nullified and subservient to him. Now, because of that status, the alkain, and therefore, gam avase la Hashem eino betachlis. Also, his love to God is incomplete. Because remember, we said that love is in this context is mutually exclusive, right? You can't say I love Jews, but I also love Hitler. It doesn't work. Like, yeah, but some of my best friends are Jewish, but I really love Hitler's ideology. It doesn't go. You can say I love Jews and I love this person who's critical of Israel. Okay, fine. They could be on the same team in some things and on different teams in other things. But Hashem and loving God and loving worldly pleasures are mutually exclusive. Because worldly pleasures come from Sitra Achra. They come from they come from a force whose entire raison d'être is to oppose godliness. So if you're like, I like that thing that opposes godliness, how can you be loving God at the same time? So even though outwardly the tzaddik she'enoi gamor is not actually pursuing any of those foreign loves of material things, but the love exists there. And because it exists, even though it exists in a nullified form, the love to Hashem is missing a link. It's not fully complete. So we see they mirror each other. If he's got a little bit of love towards Sitra Achra, there's going to be a little lacking in the love to God. Or I should say, because his love of God is lacking somewhat, that's proof that there's a little bit of Sitra Achra which he loves. So because he's called a tzaddik virale, because he's called a tzaddik which evil is to him, that he still has a little bit of evil, although very much nullified, that proves that his love to Hashem is not in an absolute way. It's not absolute love, and therefore there isn't absolute hatred towards Sitra Achra. Nikra, and therefore this person is called, meaning the person who we just described as tzaddik viraloi, the tzaddik which a little bit of evil is subservient to him, but still exists there. That person is called tzaddik she'enoi gamor, the tzaddik who's not complete, because his love to Hashem is not absolute, and therefore he's called incomplete, because the tzaddik within him. And what is a tzaddik? Define the word tzaddik. Tzaddik is someone who loves God. So he's not an absolute God lover. He's an almost absolute God lover. He's an incomplete God lover. He's certainly a God lover, but he's an incomplete God lover. So how would you describe him? A God lover. Now, is he an absolute God lover? Almost. So we're just calling him an incomplete God lover. It's almost like I have a Google Pixel 6, and if I'm not mistaken, there's two versions of each level of the Google Pixel. There's Pixel 6 and Pixel 6a, Pixel 7, Pixel 7a, and if I'm not mistaken, the Pixel A version, it has like a plastic back, and the non-A version is the glass back, which is like considered the higher quality. So it has all the same functionalities, but it's like, it's a little off. We cut a little corners over there. And so it has the same number, but it's with an asterisk. So I guess you can say he's a tzaddik with an asterisk. Does he love God? Yes. Will he ever sin? Absolutely not. Does he hate anything that opposes God? Of course. So then what's the difference between him and the complete tzaddik? A little asterisk. A little incomplete. The hatred and the disgust of worldly matters of Sitra Achra is not absolute. So, on the one hand, he's a tzaddik, he's a God lover. He completed the battle with the evil. There is no evil within him. There's nothing that will ever cause him to sin. He's never going to have a change of heart and say, "Oh, you know what? Maybe I should go, off with some whatever, eat some pork today." It's just not going to happen. There is no desire for that. However, the desire does exist in some crevice, in some unnoticeable place. So the commonality between both types of tzaddikim is that they chased out all evil from the left side of their, from the animal soul, from the left side. Meaning not only do they not fulfill any taiva, any desire in thought, speech, or deed, but even the desire itself doesn't come to mind. He doesn't ever have to battle internally with desires that are negative, but on the contrary, any such thought is just so, outrageous and not something you'd ever consider. And that's because he loves God, therefore automatically he hates anything against God. So then what's the difference between the two types of tzaddikim? Sorry. The tzaddik gamor loves Hashem in a way of full delight with absolute certainty and completion. And that creates utter absolute hatred to the Sitra Achra, and therefore is totally disgusted, totally, absolutely repulsed by any worldly pleasures. And so because of that, the pleasure, the power for pleasure still exists with him. But now that it has been completely deactivated out of sheer disgust for any worldly things, it doesn't go away. Now you released, what do they say in release the Kraken? Release the Nefesh HaBahamis now to the side of the godly soul. And now, once that little bit is removed, the last little tiny remnants of desire for anything worldly, now that force just springs into action on behalf of the godly soul. However, the incomplete tzaddik doesn't have an absolute love for Hashem, and therefore the hatred to worldly things are not absolute. And so, since not all of everything evil was totally destroyed, even though he does love God to a great degree, his animal soul is still not on board. His animal soul is still stuck, largely deactivated, but it hasn't been transformed to good. And keep in mind that this incomplete tzaddik is a general description for many levels. It divides into many levels. In other words, when we say there's a little bit of evil left, which bit of evil is left? So he says, in as far as the minutia of evil, which can be left over from one of the four evil foundations, as we explained in chapter 1 of Tanya towards the end, that every Jewish soul, every Jewish person has a nefesh habahamis, an animal soul, which comes from the Sitra Achra, from the other side, and it has four elements. It has Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. Fire, wind, water, and earth. So, when we talk about the incomplete tzaddik not getting rid of all the evil, it could be that he got rid of the fire, water, and wind, but he didn't get rid of the earth, or he didn't get rid of the water, he didn't get rid of the the fire, whatever it is, some element, and even within that, there could be only a minutia and a little tiny bit of one of those four elements left over from the power of desire within the animal soul. And so within that, there could be a multitude of levels. And to what degree there is something left. And sorry. Firstly, there's a difference between the four elements. Which of the four elements might still remain? And secondly, ubeinian bitulai bimiutai. And as far as its nullification in quantity, whether it's bishishim al derech mashal, for example, it's nullified in 60, as we know in the laws of kosher, when something has 60 times overpowering it in flavor, you're not going to experience the flavor that's less than a 60th. Or maybe this evil inside of him is nullified and overpowered by 1,000 or a vava or even 10,000 or similar things. So we're talking about to what degree was the evil destroyed and how far has it been weakened? Has it been overpowered 60 to 1 against the godly soul? Or has it been overpowered 1,000 to 1, 10,000 to 1? So then we're not just talking about one of the elements of the evil side, the Eish Ruach Mayim Afar, the fire, wind, water, and earth, but we're also saying that within that element, it's been so overpowered and so diluted and so irrelevant. All of that creates varying degrees of different types of tzaddik she'enei gamurs, of incomplete tzaddikim. And so here the Alter Rebbe references a pre-existing teaching, and these are the many tzaddikim, the many righteous people in all generations. Kedisa b'Gemara, as the Gemara says in Tractate Sukkah, the Tamnesar Alfei Tzaddikei Kaimi Kame HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there are 18,000 tzaddikim that are standing in front of Hashem. So in some places it says that there are very few tzaddikim. Over here the Gemara is talking about that there are 18,000 tzaddikim. And if I understand correctly, it's 18,000 in each generation. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I'll leave that in question, whether that's 18,000 total over time or 18,000 in each generation. But what we're talking about over here in the 18,000 number is that we're talking about 18,000 tzaddikim she'enam gemurim, 18,000 incomplete tzaddikim. So yes, in practice and in actual feelings of desire, they are tzaddikim. They are completely righteous. They will never ever do a sin in their lives again. But was it totally nullified to the point that they converted their animal soul into holiness? That not. And within this category, there are many, many levels, 18,000, as he says. And so that's something that's a lot more, even that is not so attainable, but it's, they're simply numbers wise, there are a lot more of those than there are of the complete tzaddikim. So just to summarize, the tzaddik she'enei gamur, the incomplete tzaddik, does not hate the sitra achra with absolute hatred, and therefore he is not disgusted with absolute disgust with anything evil. And since his worldly pleasures are not absolutely foreign and absolutely repulsive to him, that means that there is something in its in the animal soul that exists, and therefore the power of desire in the animal soul was not transformed to good. And that's why he's called a tzaddik v'ra lai, tzaddik which evil is to him, which means that there still is a little bit of evil. And the cause for this is because his love to Hashem is not absolute, and therefore he's called an incomplete God lover, a tzaddik she'enei gamur, that his love to Hashem is not absolute. And within this level, there are many different detailed levels, both in the type of evil that's remaining and also in the quantity, with how far percentage-wise it's been diminished. etc., etc. Thank you for joining us.